My name is Beth Birmingham, 22 years at Eastern University, and then also as a consultant for about 15 years alongside many of the Christian NGOs that make up the Accord Network, and then had a few years serving in one in particular. So it's just such a blessing to see this day come about. So
my name is Emily Sarmiento, and I work with TearfundUSA, who is kind of the behind the scenes host organization in terms of the operational side of getting this alliance off the ground.
So how we approached this is last summer, just started praying and saying, Lord, throw up the doors if you don't want us to move forward, or open up the doors. And he just kept opening doors. And so we just held our hands wide open and walked on through. Last summer, we pulled together a steering committee because this really needs to be a community effort. We wanted it to be a global community because we know where the needs are greatest for some of the things that this alliance can be. And so our steering committee are 14 women that you've seen on the High Bright platform, on the Alliance platform, from 7 different countries and all experience ranges, to work out everything from what do we call this thing, what are the values we want to achieve, what are the things that we potentially feel are the initial needs of the community. Because the reality is, now that we have a pilot group, now that we start bringing women on, you are coming to help us actually build the table, is the metaphor that we're using. Mm-hmm. So the Alliance is actually a gathering of women globally in 2 ways. One is the online sphere that allows us to reach women in parts of the world that don't have access easily to leadership development, to spiritual formation, to having a coach from somebody in the sector that understands their work, but also face-to-face gatherings. And then at some point, our vision is that wouldn't it be great if this is spreading around the world with chapters? So perhaps we have the Kenya chapter or the Nairobi chapter, but that too needs to be member-led and driven by your needs and your desires. So you have come into this on the ground floor, as people who are roll up our sleeves and let's pour into something that would be passionate about the topic and have something to bring to the table.
Great, Beth. I'd like to say I've used this a couple of times with folks, like, you are coming in on the ground floor because we're just barely up from the basement. But let's talk a little bit about the basement, kind of where this came from, to even come up to this point. So Wheaton College, for a number of years, for 3 or 4 years now, 4 or 5 years, maybe even, Beth, I don't have my dates straight, but Dr. Amy Reynolds, who's in the sociology department at Wheaton, started this initiative to really study the intersection of gender and development and Christianity. So specifically, what are the gendered dynamics in Christian development spaces? And she called together a group of, I kind of say like a think tank, to look at data across the sector, look at research, and look at needed policies to affect positive change. And really piecing together the story of how are women represented in leadership and influence in Christian relief and development, and what are the broader stats around women's participation in the sector. We have those core stats around, currently within Christian relief and development spaces, on average, 15% of CEO and exec seat roles are held by women, and 25% roughly of board seats are held by women. So minorities there, yet we know 75% of the workforce are women in Christian relief and development globally, and 60 to 70% on average of the decision makers on financial support of Christian relief and development are women, and a primary percentage of stakeholders in the field, or beneficiaries, program participants, are women. And so the group was really wrestling with, here's the reality, that we're serving women, we're dependent on women for this work, yet women are not predominantly represented in the strategic decisions and the resource decisions about how development takes place. This is brilliant data. It needs to be platformed. We need to have conversations around this this, and we need to create pathways for change. And we want to do that in a really constructive, kingdom edifying way, but exposing realities and lived experience, and talking and bringing together collective brilliance to actually change it. So we really went forward from last year's Wheaton conversation saying, this is brilliant. It needs critical mass. How do we develop critical mass for the right conversations? And that is really what led to having this conversation. The data and knowing that we need to draw more people into studying it together and then bringing forward the ideas to solve it. We want to see people flourish in their life callings of the Lord, and we want to see systems change so that they can.
To speak to some of the other folks that are around the table, we realized that we wanted this to be an alliance, which means bringing together organizations who have this as a passion and a vision. Obviously, that starts with Amy Reynolds and the Wheaton Network Initiative on gender, Christianity, and development. So Wheaton and her work is a full partner in this alliance. Specifically helping us with research, because research and doing research of our lived experiences, but also collecting data about our organizations will be critical, and we'll still have to speak about that. The second one is a need for equipping and leadership development. And I know no better leadership development organization that is recognized globally than Development Associates International. So they are a full partner, Jane Overstreet, CEO, at the table, and they've opened up their entire catalog of offerings to us. And then lastly, our pioneer, who's been at this far longer than all of us, is Mimi Haddad at Christians for Biblical Equality. And they are a gender theology group of theologians that have been operating for 40 years. So if you go to their site and look at some of the amazing things they have published, but they too are bringing some of those offerings to the Alliance so that we have them as a theological partner in this work. And they're not the only ones. Absolutely, there are going to be others that want to come, but they're the pioneers who are helping to build this reality. And then, as you saw on the platform, we have a new George, who is the executive director, IJM, who's Grina Villacorta, is a longtime World Vision International executive, and now as an executive coach in Peru. And Ava, the senior leader at World Relief. Emily, Jane Overstreet. Latasha Satterfield is on TearfundUSA's board, so she is our board liaison, and she's a pastor here in America. And then Nadine Bowers-Dutoit is a professor of theology and development in South Africa. And then Bibiana McLeod, some of you know, she's Argentinian, and she works for Medical Ambassadors International, but it's focusing now on human trafficking for World Evangelical Alliance. Sarah Brackbill is also one of our leaders in this, talent management person at Compassion. And then Amanda Mia, who's been our backbone in a lot of this work, as really the administrative leader in this from TearfundUSA standpoint. So
we're so grateful for your leadership in this. I've thought a couple times, like, how do I explain this to people in terms of kind of the heartbeat? And part of it's sisterhood, sorority, community, fellowship, and we'll unpack a little bit more concretely, but with smarts, with technical smarts and with game-changing plays. And so I just want to emphasize that this is not just a gathering just for the sake of it. We're all busy women, the people that we're inviting in, all the names that Beth just read off are extremely busy individuals, but we're committed to a vision of needed change. And there are specific changes that we want to see out of this effort. And the steering committee that Beth just named, we've been advancing, how will we measure that change? How will we baseline, and how will we measure, and how will we attribute the contributions of the Alliance to bringing about that change. But you saw the change on the front page of the Alliance website. I mean, there are three broad categories that I just want to point us back to. And first and foremost, it's about individual women flourishing in their ministry callings. So we want to help individual women through the Alliance be able to fully live into their gifts and have more pathways to grow in those gifts and living that out within Christian Relief and Development. So certainly there's an individual outcome area that we're focused on. The next one is certainly diversity and a more egalitarian leadership across the sector. You know, looking back at those stats I just referenced of how underrepresented women are in leadership, we really want to influence change, you know, and Wheaton has incubated some great tools and resources to help us launch some of that, both in terms of principles of gender equality in the sector, scorecard, either tools and resources we want to get into more hands to help bring about some of that diversification change within the sector. And ultimately, we want that because of the third category of outcomes that we're looking at. We know all corporate research would say where there's greater diversity at the top tables, greater missional outcomes, greater return on investment. And so while that data doesn't exist as robustly specific to the INGO sector, we want to help produce it. The logic is parallel to what we believe can happen here. And so we want to help prove and we want to help monitor over time how poverty alleviation is better impacted the greater diversity, the more balanced tables you have at the top. So we're very specific about keeping our eyes on women flourishing in their callings, diversity in the sector for the purpose of improved poverty alleviation outcomes. And we're committed to measuring that as we go.
I think I will pull up the site. Click on the About Us. There's content there. So here's the way we're conceptualizing what this alliance provides. And you'll notice, like every good NGO, we came up with an acronym. Community, advocacy, restoration, equipping. And what does that equal? Care. Mainly because some of us need those kinds of things to remember when we're talking. But each of these is very deliberate in having to create a system approach to this. These are some of the elements of a system to move the needle for gender equality in the development sector. So number one is just bringing women together and finding a place of women and our male allies, but building relationships, connecting both at a macro level and then on individual levels. Being able to share lived experiences, being able to form groups and learn together on different aspects of this work, and regularly challenging one another, sharing job postings, encouraging each other to go for that next vice presidency, if that's your calling, if that's your thing. So the community part is key because far too many women feel alone when they experience burnout in their workplace, harassment in the workplace, you name it, whatever the experience might be. And so in some other work that I've done, I find that when you bring women together, there is strength and there is comfort there, and there's a ton of male allies who want to be our support and who want to join us in this work. The second piece that Emily just started to talk about was the research. So we put research and advocacy in one bucket. The reason we are, going to regularly seek your input, do an annual survey, things like that, is we need to start tracking about 5 or 6 key indicators that we can measure over time to start to demonstrate that we're moving the needle, not only for greater gender parity around our leadership tables throughout our organizations, but also starting to move the needle on the performance aspect of the organizations. And so every time you participate in a survey or some sort of focus group or whatever, know that you are contributing your voice to help us demonstrate that, that case to be made, that with greater equality, we're going to see better performance in our organizations. And at the end of the day, that's what we care about, honoring Jesus by bringing our very best as World Relief, as World Vision, as Habitat for Humanity. So what does advocacy look like? We want to do positive advocacy by celebrating the organizations that are doing well. So what if by 2023, we are starting to publish the top 5 large faith-based NGOs for women to work in, and the top 5 small to medium faith-based NGOs for women to work in. When other organizations start seeing those lists, they're going to want to find out, how do we get on that list? And we will have answers for them. Calling out and celebrating what God is already doing in some really great organizations. Then we want to take that information to foundations and individual donors who say, yes, I am all for diversity. Love your statement on your website. We put a statement on our website too. And yet, perhaps the top 10 grants that they offered this year went to organizations that lack diversity. So if we're going to say we're about something, let's demonstrate and help you figure out how to ensure that your actions match what you say you're about. And again, positive, focus on that. And that seems to be a really appealing message to the foundation folks that I've talked to so far, and they've contributed already to the startup costs for this. Restoration, the messaging of the world, the messaging of our organizations, the messaging sometimes from our churches has led some women to believe that they are less than, that they're not created in God's image, that they're not called for all of his purposes and equipped for that calling. And so we recognize both emotional healing and having places to bring those hurts so that we grow beyond them. We're going to let God heal through spiritual formation, through emotional and trauma healing. And for whatever God has called you to, it may just be expanded influence in the role that you're currently serving in, or perhaps you do have aspirations for a higher level position. Leadership development, practical things on developing your team, that's the things that we want you to tell us as the builders of this table. What would be most valuable to you? What are the kinds of topics that are most pressing for you now, or that you hear your colleagues around you saying, wow, it'd be really great if we had access to that? And then we will curate it, create it, find ways to provide it, invite you to come and provide it if it's an area of your expertise that you could share. So that's what we're looking at when we say we want this to be a community that offers care.
Part of coming out of the basement to the first floor, is this viable? Should we do this? We really spent time studying what other networks are out there, because we didn't want to waste time or effort or resources creating a parallel structure to something that already existed. And we found there's some brilliant leadership development networks out there. There's some brilliant spiritual formation or development networks out there. There's some brilliant, global networks, but we did not find something that married our faith foundations with technical skills development and in our niche sector of global relief and development. And so we're not trying to be all things to all people, although we would welcome anyone. Our heart behind this is really serve women and allies who are called into spaces of Christian relief and development where we know that faith is fundamental to the transformation that we seek. And so we believe there doesn't exist the same space. Yes, there are church leadership networks and those kinds of things, but the nuance is bringing together, like the Wheaton Initiative started, faith, gender, development, because it's all connected, and faith is what we believe influences the transformation we seek. So just want to lay that out, that we were very intentional to try to research. And as Beth alluded, we've been talking to a lot of people. There are a lot of names you haven't seen yet in terms of, is this viable? Would you get behind this? Would you put your name behind this? And this phase that you're in now, we have a concept, we have an engagement platform, we have a model, but now we're really coming into a group to say, how does it feel? What's the highest priority of the choices that we've put together to date? And we want you to help us refine that so that we can go forward and we can bring in those other relationships who want to help us invite a much broader community into this place. So your builder's role is significant for us at this stage to be able to continue to take it forward.